Welcome everyone to another amazing lockpicking central video. Today we are going to go over how the security pins work in a serrated pin. I guess you could call it practice lock. It has a cutout here, as you can probably see. The serrated pins are the key pins and the driver pins, and this are just standard pins. So this is from Sparrow's, as you can probably guess, Sparrow's lock picks. I will put a link in the description. It is just like the standard practice lock we had, except it has serrated pins. I guess I'll probably put a little diagram on here, how serrated pins look and how it works, and then we'll get back to this.
Okay, before we get into any of that, I briefly want to go over how a lock works. So, the green part of this is the shell, and that is what's going to hold the yellow part, which is the plug. So let's start on the right-hand side at the bottom with the keyway. The keyway is where the key is going to be inserted. That makes sense. Above that, we have the key pins, which are red. Now, the key pins can be standard, spool, uh, serrated. There's many more. We'll go over that in a separate slide. So that's the key pins, and above that is the driver pins in blue. And above that is the springs that keeps all of this down in the keyway. So basically how lock picking works, or putting a key in there, is you're pushing up these red key pins to put these driver pins out of the way of the plug or above the shear line. So let's go over to the left. So you have the pin chambers, which is just the hollowed out area where the pins sit. The green, the shell, we've already talked about that. The shear line, we'll go into that in a little more detail, and the plug in yellow. So the red key pins with the key, or if you're picking, you're pushing this red pin up, which in turn pushes this blue driver pin up out of the way above this shear line. And once you get above the shear line, and you're applying pressure lock picking, it will stay above that shear line. With the key, it lines up perfectly and is perfectly straight. So let's go ahead and show you what inserting a key actually looks like when it's supposed to be done correctly. Okay, so this is with a key in place. As you can see, this key has indentations or cutouts for the key pins, and it sits perfectly in each one of those spots, which pushes up the blue pins perfectly straight, except for that second one. That's just showing you what happened if the key had a little bit too far of a cutout. So basically, all these pins need to be perfectly above that shear line, and that is what allows the lock to be opened. So let's go into different kinds of locks we have out there. Okay, so here we have a couple different locks. I'm not going to go over all of them, just your standard locks. At least that's what we see in the US. So on the left here we have the standard tumbler lock you see in most houses. Next to that on the top right is a tubular lock. You see that on most vending machines and stuff like that. And on the bottom right we have a wafer tumbler lock. You see those a lot in like cabinets and stuff like that. So those are the basic locks we have in the United States. Let's go ahead and get into what this video is all about, and that is pins. Security pins to be specific. So let's go into a little more detail about that, and then we can get back into picking this serrated pin practice lock. Okay, so here is security pins. So let's start at the top. We have a spool pin, which we'll be going over in our next video. That's basically how it sits in the core. So you have your red at the bottom here. That's going to be, well, that's going to be your key pin. For this one, it's flipped around. It's usually uh, the other way around. The key pins are usually the spool and serrated and stuff like that, but that's okay. Either way, it doesn't matter. This is how it is in a lock. You have the blue is your security pin. In this case, it has a spool here. And the next slide will go over how these spool and serrated work. And the bottom left is your serrated. As you can tell, it has edges here as opposed to the spool, which only has two edges and the middle is pushed in. The serrated has many different ridges for it to get caught on. And then we have the mushroom, which I do not have a lock that has this in here currently, but we will be going over that in a future video. So the mushroom is kind of like a spool pin. Um, it can be harder than a spool pin because it gets narrow and then gets wide again. So there's different ways of securing your lock. They offer different kinds of techniques required to be able to lock them. So let's go ahead and show you the spool pin diagram real quick of how that is functioning, and then we will get into the serrated, which is what this video is all about. Okay, so as you can see here, this will play a couple times, but this is a spool pin. So what happens is it gets stuck on the bottom there as you're applying tension to push up on the pin there, and it gets stuck, and you may be required to release a little bit of tension to push it the rest of the way up. So that's a spool pin. Let's check out the serrated pin, which we are doing today. Okay, so as you can see here, this will also play a couple times, but this is how a serrated pin works. It can be a lot more difficult than a spool pin because you have many ridges you have to get past, and it can get stuck on any number of them, and it may jam up the lock entirely until you release some tension and push it the rest of the way up. Both spool and security pins can make this lock you have a false set when you go into one of those spaces, or it can entirely lock this lock up completely until you release tension. So they are pretty decent security features. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and get on to picking this lock.
Okay, now that we're back, I'm going to take this key out. Okay, so it pretty much looks similar to the other key that we had in the standard lock, except the only difference here is the serrated pins. It's going to be hard to see, but basically how serrated pins work is they are the same thing as a flat standard pin, but it has notches in it. It depends on who makes it. Sometimes they only have one notch, sometimes they have 4 notches, you know, 3, whatever, it depends. These, let's see, looks like they have 3 or 4 notches in these. So what happens is when you put your pick in there and you're applying tension and you're lifting up, it will get caught in that notch, and it might feel like it's either stuck or that it's set, when in reality it's just at the first notch and you need to keep going up. Sometimes you need to relieve tension on the tension wrench in order to keep making that pin go up until it becomes truly set. They can be hard to detect when it's enclosed and you can't actually see it. I guess I'll try to show it so you can see the pins here, because this is not really going to show you much. I'll just tell you how, you know, number 1, 2, 3, and stuff like that. Okay, let's get started. We got the Z-bar today, normal Z-bar. I love the Z-bars, small end, large end. And then we are going to use the half diamond, another one of my favorite tools. Both of these, I believe, are from Spare's lock picking set. Okay, so we're going to use bottom of the keyway tension in here, and let's see if we can't get a decent angle in here. See what I'm doing here. Okay, so number 1 is actually loose. Oh, stuck on that bottom one. Okay, so we got number 1 there. Number 1's very loose. So let's move on to number 2. Number 2, ooh, deep in there. Let's see if we can't get number 2 here. There we go. Okay, so we got one of those clicks. I don't know if you could hear it. Got 1 click there. And letting some tension go. 2 clicks. 3 clicks. Okay, as you can see now, that is moving. So let's go back to 1. And that's still loose. Okay, so now let's move on to 3. Got 1 click out of 3. And 3 seems set. 4 is loose. Oh, dropped 2 here, let too much tension go. So as you can tell, it's a little bit hard to do. There we go. Okay, so 2 is set, 1 is set. Let's move back to 3. If you let too much tension go, as I just did, they can all drop back down. So let's move on to 3. Okay, 3 is now set. 2 is set. 3 is set. 4 is set. Let's get the last one here. Number 5. And there we go. We got the lock open. As you can tell, I'm spinning it. It does not happen unless it's open. So that's basically how it works. You have a lot of serrated edges in there, and they get stuck, and sometimes you have to release tension in the lock itself You have to, if you're putting a lot of tension on there, you end up might have just a little bit of tension release, sometimes a lot, depends on the lock itself and how tight the tolerances are. Obviously, these are made a little bit poorer tolerances, a little looser tolerances on purpose to make them easier to pick, but that's the gist of it. So you have little notches in here, you have to keep picking. Sometimes you have to do it 3, 4, 5, 6 times until all of them are actually completely set. So with that said, I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day. Catch you in the next video, guys.